Welcome to The Bold Book of the Day with Dr. Denise Nicholson, a show that is a central hub and safe space for authors to share their stories. The Bold Book with Dr. Denise begins now.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Denise Nicholson, and this podcast is for anyone looking for inspiration. Today, we have our beautiful and wonderful writer, Barbara J. Taylor, who is going to focus on her book, Rain Breaks No Bones. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Denise Nicholson, for inviting me. I love these opportunities, so thank you.
Well, you have a beautiful book, so it's important for us to share, get that
Thank
message as much as we can out into the world. So what inspired you to write your book, Rain Breaks No Bones?
Originally, so Rain Breaks No Bones is the third and final book in a series. Now, the books are standalones. They can be read in any order. But the original inspiration came for the first novel, Sing in the Morning, Cry at Night, and it was based very loosely on a family story. So in real life, in 1918, my grandmother's sister, Pearl, it was the day of her baptism. She was 7 going on 8, and it was the 4th of July. So she and her friends were playing with sparklers in the yard, and tragically, her dress caught on fire. And as the story goes, she survived for 3 days and sang hymns, never a word of complaint. So when she passed away, people all over Scranton, Pennsylvania, came to view the body of the little girl who sang hymns. And I grew up with that story. I grew up hearing about the tragedy. And as awful, of course, as it was for my Aunt Pearl, I always wondered about her sister Janet, who was in the yard with her that day. She didn't have the happiest life. And for example, she was married 4 times to the same 2 men. So she couldn't really make up her mind. She had some of her own personal tragedies. And I wondered how much of that stemmed from what she witnessed. And so all of that wondering created my protagonist, Violet, who shows up in every book. In Sing in the Morning, Cry at Night, she's a little girl of 8. In All Waiting Is Long, she's 25. In the new book, Rain Breaks No Bones, she's 50, which when I was writing it, I was in my 50s. I'm 61 now. But so they're 3 completely separate stories because those are 3 such different ages. But that was the original inspiration.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Oh my goodness, I'm thinking about the tragedy of losing a sister, and not being not the focus of attention, but the focus of healing after, because they just try to let you not remember sometimes, or not to rehash that pain, and may have tried to quell something when it probably would have been good to just continue having a conversation where she can go over it as frequently as possible. A lot of times we don't get the help that we need when we're young. Was that part of why you thought it was such an important to write about the protagonist and to write this story in general?
I did. It was 1918 in the original story, and you didn't send your child for therapy. You didn't get that kind of help. You're absolutely right. At most, they had the church, which was certainly important, but you weren't getting the kind of counseling and therapy. My mother used to tell me that my great-grandmother moved a lot. After Pearl died, she could never get settled.
Yes.
And so they dealt with it by trying to move on, and it never worked. I'll tell you, I have a cousin who's significantly younger than I am. And she said to me one day, she has small kids, and she said to me, "Are you as afraid of fireworks as I am?" And I suddenly realized that generational fear, just something as simple as sparklers, has been carried through the generations because we never really did deal with it.
Yes.
And even when you deal with it, a trauma like that, of course, carries on. So absolutely, that's what I was thinking when I created her.
The book explores themes of secrets and legacy. And did you write about these or explore the legacy of loss and the secret because of a legacy that you would like to leave and change for the future of your family?
That's interesting. I don't know that I was thinking about that
Uh-huh.
consciously. I do know I wrote each of my books, including the new one, as love letters to the people that I love. I can tell you where every name came from and that sort of thing. I mean, the stories are fiction,
Yeah.
but the love is there. So it's very possible that subconsciously I was trying to heal something. I know that in my second book, um, or actually no, in the first book when she loses the child, I thought I was using one person as inspiration for that, my great grandmother, and I realized I'd had some loss in my own life. I've had multiple miscarriages in life, and I realized years after the book came out, oh, that was me, that wasn't my great grandmother. So I do think we as writers, we try to heal
Yeah.
through the writing, and sometimes we don't even know it.
Yeah. Why do you think that these themes of legacy and secret resonate so strongly with readers?
Well, I think secrets are everywhere, right? I mean, sometimes we try to keep a secret, and in fact, in the books, oftentimes, I mean, these are good people that I write about who have had tragic circumstances, and sometimes they keep a secret. They think they're doing the right thing. For
Yeah.
example, there's a child that's born out of wedlock, so there's a lot of secrecy around her. Um, so we all do it. I think it's human nature. We want to be better than that, but we want to be truth tellers, but oftentimes we suppress that. So I think it's just natural, and we gravitate toward that. And as far as legacy and so forth, I think for me, as tragic as the circumstances are that started the books, and they have some situations that are pretty traumatic in each book because it's a story and you want that.
Yeah.
My message is always hope. I don't tie it up with a ribbon, but I
Yeah.
end on a day where it's possible that
Yeah.
things can be good.
Oh, I love that. So I appreciate that because my message is also of hope and inspiration because I meet so many authors who have gone through tragic experiences, and I want them to realize that it is important to share the story, but it's also important to share a message of hope and inspiration. So I love that that is not tied up in a bow, but it's
Right.
maybe the theme throughout so people can see that there is hope somewhere and realize it, if not sooner than the end of the book, but at least by the end they have hope for their future.
I think that's all we can give people, right? And give ourselves, no matter the circumstances. You take hope away from somebody, and what do they have? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you move on without it. So I'm
Yeah.
an eternal optimist as well.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I remember I having a conversation with my daughter in the pandemic. And at that time, there was the George Floyd incident. And we were all so very upset. And I said to her, I shouldn't have said this to her, but I said, oh my God, things, just, it's not going to change. And she said, no, things will change. Things must change. You cannot say that because if you say that, then there's no hope for me. And immediately, oh my God, it opened up a nice spot for us to have a conversation about that and how never to say things out of desperation because words have power and people are listening to you, your children are listening to you, and hope is very important.
And it's funny you mention that particular time period. I remember, COVID, we were locked up, and unfortunately the tragedy of George Floyd, and I
Yeah.
wanted to go and be with people, and there was a protest in Scranton. I didn't want to travel too far because of COVID, and
Uh-huh.
I went to downtown Scranton. We're small but mighty, and masked, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people at Courthouse Square, uh, there and speaking their truth. There were these amazing young people on the stage speaking their truth. And I thought, well, this is it. There is hope. You're
Uh,
right. It's the future we have to think about,
yeah.
not ourselves. We have to give them
Yes.
hope.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Beautiful.
that's beautiful.
Thank you for being a warrior.
I'm learning. I'm always learning.
Me
So,
too. Me
yes.
too.
In fact, I will say in the new novel, Rain Breaks No Bones, it's set during it's set in 1955 on the cusp of the civil rights movement. And boy, did I do a lot of learning in order to include Black characters in my book as a white writer.
Yeah, Scranton plays such a vital role in your novel. How do your personal connection to the city influence your storytelling?
I was born and raised here. I'm living here. I just moved back again in February, so I can look out my window and see the Scranton Times building. It's pretty iconic. Scranton is just in my heart. I was married at one point and living in Memphis, and not very happily. And I was watching television, and a television show came on, and I looked, and it was Wyoming Avenue in Scranton, The Office. I'd never heard of it. It was brand new. And I realized how much I loved home. I had to go away to realize how much I loved home. And I'll tell you the people here, they're warriors. We started, really, the mining industry was what brought recognition to Scranton. And those men and women who were supporting them fought so hard for workers' rights. Some of the rights we have today is because of what the miners fought for. So there's a legacy here in Scranton, and it's just fertile for writing.
Beautiful. I understand that when you're writing a book, you are really trying to conjure up characters that you can relate to. And so you use people that are around you so that you can understand characters and develop them very well. And your characters like Violet and Daisy and Zethri, they are richly drawn and complex. So how do you go about creating such a vivid and, I guess, multidimensional characters?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do think of people in real life, and that's sort of the to kick it off. They never turn out like the people are in real life, but that's what gets me started.
Yeah.
From there, I spend a lot of time looking at what their wounds are. I want to know about their wounds because I think that we really are motivated. We gravitate towards certain people, partners in life that maybe it's not a successful relationship, but why did we gravitate there to begin with? So I look at their wounds, and this is crazy, but I try to listen to my characters. In the new book, it opens. So the new book starts in 1955. But there was this story about this woman with a chair that somebody told me at a book club. I'm always listening for ideas. And this story wouldn't let me go. But in my head, I saw this woman in 1916. And in the meantime, I started my novel. It was 1955. Everything was going great, but she wouldn't let me go. And I even one time in my head said to her, listen, I'll write your story. It's just not this book. This has nothing to do. And she wouldn't let go. And I should have known better. I should have learned that lesson already. And finally, one day I just gave in and I listened, and that's where the character came from. So I don't know where that inspiration comes from. I'm always just grateful. The muse, God, the ancestors, wherever it's coming from, more please. And so I listen to what the characters have to say.
Important, of course, because the characters come alive. And, if we pay attention, then it weaves a very interesting story and can give us the hope that we want in our world. You talked about the weaving of different generations into your work and into the characters. How did you approach that?
Initially, I approached it accidentally. So I wrote the first book when I was a graduate student at Wilkes University in their creative writing MFA program. I did not intend for it to be part of a series. I barely knew what I was doing. But then what they do at Wilkes University, it's a great program. It's you just go 2 weeks a year. Everything else is online. And when you're finished with your project, they send it to an outside reader. And mine turned out to be Chris Tomasino, who has since become my agent. But at the time, she said to me, if a publisher invests in you, they're going to want to see 3 books in the same genre, or they're going to want to see a trilogy. And I thought about it, and I decided I really think these characters have more to say. But what I didn't want to do was end on a Monday and start on a Tuesday. I wanted to really, it's silly, but I wanted to give them room to breathe and relax and not have another crisis so quickly.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to look at different historical periods to make it interesting for me. So I set the first one in 1913, the second one in 1935, the third one in 1955. But I have the same core characters. So Violet goes from 8 years old to 50. Grace goes from in her 20s to in her 70s. And I have always been one to collect family stories. This is crazy. When I was a little girl and I didn't quite understand death, I used to love to go to funerals with my parents because I would hear family stories. I loved meeting relatives, family stories. So I've always paid attention to the generations. And I think that comes out in the writing.
So is it safe to say that your grandmother helped you to develop a love of storytelling, so you are the woman you are today, the author you are today?
Without a doubt. My grandmother, I remember, I didn't start writing until I was in my 40s. But I always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't think I could be a writer. I'd never had any examples. I didn't know writers. But my grandmother would tell me stories and I would write them down. And we went to the library at one point, and there was an old newspaper called the Scranton Truth. I love that name. And we went through newspapers doing, family history and that sort of thing. And I definitely got a love for storytelling from her, for sure. And my dad. By the time I started writing, my mom had passed away. And for whatever reason, I decided my dad needed a project. He did not need a project. My dad was he had a very full life, a very busy man, but I wanted him to have this project that we could do together. We did all of this research. We'd go to the mines here. He'd drive me around. He'd tell me his stories. And even though he passed away before the first book came out, his research is in every book I've written. His voice is there. Yeah, we wrote those books together.
That's a beautiful legacy.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
So the writing process includes a lot of research, and I'm so glad we got there, because I preach often to, budding authors that in order for you to really season the story, it needs to have some details, and the details are in the research.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm an organic writer, so I don't outline. I figure it out as I go. But I think what gives me some bumpers on the writing is the historical research, because it needs to be plausible. It needs, I need it to be that it could have happened. And when I'm researching, I only use primary sources. So I don't read books about the time period in case they got it wrong, or I don't want to be influenced by their style. I read the newspapers from the time period. I'm a big eBayer. I'll buy old magazines for the second book, medical books, because I needed to know how a girl in the 30s would give birth and what the medical procedures would be. And nothing is collectible. It's all falling apart. So it's cheap. I dress my characters and furnish their rooms with catalogs from the time periods. So that's how I know what kind of a heater would have been in a parlor in 1913, that sort of thing. So the research really is important to the work. The new book, it's about secrets, it's about legacies. It takes place on the cusp of civil rights and at a time when Hurricane Diane was coming up the coast. So those are two historical periods that I could research. And boy, I found a wealth of information about all of it. So it guides my writing.
It guides your writing, and you said that you don't really have an outline, but do you know how it's going to end?
With every book, I have a loose idea of where I want to get to in the end. I knew in this new book that Hurricane Diane was coming. So I knew that was going to be toward the end of the book. I didn't know how my characters were going to be affected by it. I didn't know any of that, but I had that sort of big picture Hurricane Diane. In the first book, I remember my grandmother talking about she was born during the Billy Sunday snowstorm. Billy Sunday was an evangelist who used to play baseball for the Chicago White Stockings. That's how long ago we're talking. And he came to town in Scranton in 1914, and there was a snowstorm with 10-foot drifts. 2,500 people were snowed in with him, and by morning they were all saved because he was very charismatic. And so I knew in that book I was leading toward that snowstorm. In my second book, All Waiting Is Long, I knew that the mine strikes were going to be a large part of it. So you find that thing and know that that's it. It gives you direction. It gives you something to head toward, even if I don't know exactly how the story will turn out.
So you have a guide. In your head, you have some major event that is going to lead up to the ending.
I know where I want to start, and I have a sense of where it's going to end, and I have no idea how I'm getting there.
You talked about interracial relationships and small town justice or small town prejudice and the impact of the Negro Motorist Green Book. What drew you to explore those issues, and how did you tie it into the story, into the broader theme of the story?
Originally, my concept was that with each book, Violet's world would get bigger. This was a Welsh mining family, Protestant, in a very small neighborhood. In Scranton, originally, all the neighborhoods, like many towns, settled depending on your ethnicity, or, what country you came from, that sort of thing. So her world was very small to begin with, and it got bigger and bigger. So it was natural by the 1950s. My book ends just a few weeks before the murder of Emmett Till. So I don't get into that, but it's brewing. All of that is brewing. If you're reading the papers, you see it. And I don't like to preach with anything. I like it almost, it's there. It's there. And I wanted to explore race in Scranton. You always hear about what the South was doing wrong. Well, we had sundown parts of our towns too. We had redlined neighborhoods, and I wanted to point that out. But also, I did so much research and conducted so many interviews, and it was funny. There's a woman in Scranton named Glynis Johns. She's amazing. She has an organization called Black Scranton, and they now took over an old bank in Providence Square, and it's a community center. She's doing amazing work here. She did a lot of research into the African American history in Scranton, and how people came to come here. And I talked to her, and it's funny, Scranton had a 50-50 record. There were times when enslaved people escaped to our town, and we immediately turned them over, and they had to go back to where they had been enslaved. Other times where we protected them and refused to let anyone take them away. So we have that mixed history, and I think it's interesting to look at that. I have an interracial relationship in the book, and I talk to people who grew up here, who actually, they were the product of interracial marriages in Scranton. A lot of people, maybe wouldn't think of Scranton as being, I don't know if I want to say forward thinking, but was that happening in Scranton in the 50s? And it was. So I wanted to go back and see. So I did all those interviews. I will tell you, as a white writer, I was writing or trying to write during COVID, during the first Trump administration, during all the protests, all of it. And I was stopped by a lot of it. And I was thinking, who am I as a white writer to include these Black characters? And it really stopped me. And then I talked to friends who are Black writers, and one friend in particular who said, I know your heart, write the book, and then we'll talk about it. And I realized, well, I need to do the same thing here that I do for every other topic. I'm not a miner, but I interviewed people. I read about mining. I immersed myself in that, that particular way of life. So I did that. And then what I did was I made sure this time my editors were all Black writers and readers. And I'll tell you, I always talk about my one friend and editor, Valinda Bryant. She really called me out because she did an amazing job editing my manuscript, and she sent it back and marked all the places where I lacked courage, because what I did as a white writer was I would have these moments where Johnny, who is black, and Daisy, who is white, would come together and just get to the point where they should have that serious conversation. And I'd have one or the other say, "Oh, let's not talk about it now," because I was afraid to go there.
Yes.
And she really called me out in the best possible way. I'm not saying that as a criticism. That's that. My book is 1,000 times better. So and then I had to do all of that work and then present it, and it is what it is, and I'll see how it's received. But I know I, as a person, grew from the experience.
Thank you for sharing how the process was, the writing process, and how you had to do your research. You had to send it over to an editor, but you were fair enough with yourself to send it to an editor that understood more about the complexities of Black people in that area, or Black people, period. So,
Right.
And I believe that it's important not to run from things and not to say, who am I to write about it? And we talked about that, how we judge ourselves all the time and talk negatively to ourselves and say, well, who are you to do this? And who are you? But I think the role of writers or authors, especially white authors, is to amplify the voice of the underrepresented. So so you use your platform to highlight the stories and the ideas and perspectives of people that were marginalized in that community. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And that is what I tried to do. And I just realized I didn't answer your part about the Green Book.
Yeah.
Long before that movie came out, somehow I became aware of the Green Books in my research.
Mhm.
And there's a facsimile. It's not the original, but that I was able to buy on eBay from that time period. And there were 3 homes in Scranton that were in the Green Book that people could come and stay in those homes. And I found that interesting because this isn't Chicago. This isn't New York. I always thought of travel and where you could stay along the way. I thought of the big cities. So I was just sort of fascinated by that. I can actually go and drive to the actual houses. They're still there that were in the Green Book. So it's just an interesting part of history.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up again. So you collaborated with other diverse backgrounds, authors from diverse backgrounds, and that helped you to paint a bigger picture or broaden the landscape, because you know how limited your experience was. So I believe that one of the most important things that I wanted to say is that, collaboration with people, when you are doing some work that you're not quite sure that you have the authority to write, as creators, not just authors, but I believe as creators, is to collaborate with people of diverse background, or people that can relate to what you're really trying to bring out in the message. So thank you.
And I thank you for that, because I have to say, every time, this is my 3rd book now, and I've started my 4th. Every time I write a book, I feel like I've forgotten how to write a book. I think everybody feels that. And the one thing I have to remind myself is, every time I get stuck, whether it's something technical or if it's something larger, like, do I have the authority to write this? Every time I get stuck, the solution is to talk to somebody.
Yes.
And I forget that every time. And I get stuck for weeks or months. And then suddenly my mentor from Wilkes will call me for some other reason. And in the conversation, it will come out. And within 5 minutes, the problem is solved. So that's a lesson. We do have to collaborate and talk and share and risk being vulnerable and making mistakes and getting it wrong. I don't know if I got it right or wrong, but I know that I made that sincere effort.
Absolutely the best thing to do. So thank you very much for that. And for those of you who are listening, who are working on projects, that you are hearing that voice that is saying, who are you and why are you doing this, and who gave you the authority to do this? Examine and challenge yourself, and examine and challenge the the reason why you are coming up with these thoughts, and also educate yourself so that you can get a broader understanding of what it is like to be in the shoe of the person that you're writing about. When you're writing about issues of injustice or inequality or racism, and educate yourself so that you can really understand the people that you're writing about. And then write with authenticity. Just be respectful and authentic, and really commit yourself to do the research and cultivate a culture of sensitivity when you're writing. Because when you're representing cultures or histories or experiences that you're not quite sure of, the best thing to do is to do your research, be culturally sensitive, and be authentic as possible. So that's my little preach for today.
Beautiful. Beautifully said.
Thank you. Let's get back to the book, though, because I
Okay.
want to know what's next.
Well, it's funny. So the new book that I just released, Rain Breaks No Bones, is set in the 50s. And I thought maybe I was finished with Scranton. And lo and behold, I've started a new book. It has nothing to do with the other three, but it is set in Scranton in the 1970s. Feminism is calling me, what the struggles that they were going through.
Yes.
I mean, there was so much at that time period that was happening in our world. And it's just a story that's been, I wrote a short story for Wilkes when I was a student there, and that short story has been just rattling around in my head for a long time. And I think that's going to become the novel. I think.
I
It's
can't
very
wait.
early.
I'm looking forward to reading the trilogy. And being that this is the final book for the Scranton trilogy, what have you learned about yourself as a writer through this journey?
That's a great question. What have I learned about myself? I've learned that I can do it. And what I mean is, writing, at least for me, is hard. And it takes me a long time. My books take years. I have friends who are writers who can write a draft in 3 months, and I can't. I just can't do that. And that's fine. Like,
Yeah,
I've just had to accept this. This is the way that this talent has shown up in me, and I'm grateful for it. And so it's given me the confidence, like, wow, I can write. Like I mentioned before, when I was a little girl, I wanted to write, but I just didn't know that was a possibility. I even remember buying a book by Barbara Taylor Bradford so I could hold my thumb over the Bradford and see my name on a cover.
Oh,
But I never
wow.
thought I could write. And now when I talk to groups, I was a former teacher, taught for 31 and a half years. So I still talk to students. I go out and give talks and let them know that, oh, you don't have to wait. You don't have to find the example. You can be the example. You can be the role model. So I guess I've gained that confidence.
I love that. And the power of visualization. You use that power to help you believe. Even though you fought yourself for many years, you still did it.
Right. It took a long time. But you know what? I was an English teacher and I absolutely loved it. I loved my students. They changed me. They shaped me. So I feel like I'm lucky. I've had 2 incredible careers. I'm in my second act. I'm a writer now. I was a teacher. It's wonderful.
Shout out to teachers. I love teachers and they make a big difference, So shout out to teachers, especially those teachers who are positive and just helping to shape students into believing that they can be anything. I love it.
Right. That's it. Because you can be. You never know. You never know. Yeah. It takes work.
I love it.
I just heard the other day, Mel Robinson, I think, said, everything is simple. It's not easy. But so it is. It's simple. Just write word for word, keep going. But it's not easy. So I'm sorry. Thank you.
And we can do hard things, whatever it is. Yeah. Because you did it. You said it wasn't easy for you. It was hard, but you learned that you can do it.
Yes.
Beautiful message this season, and beautiful message to a person who is thinking that they have no authority, they have no right, even though it's a desire, they fight themselves. You can do it. You can do it. Just keep trying. It's not going to be easy, but it's simple. Just do it.
Exactly.
Great messages. Where can we get this book? it's a trilogy, but where can
Right,
we?
but you can read them in any order. So if you
Yeah.
want to start with the new book, any of them. The books are available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I prefer independent bookstores if you can. But I have a website, barbarajtaylor.com. It's simple.
Yeah.
And if you go there, you can read about the books, what inspired them. You can find out where they're sold. So barbarajtaylor.com.
Perfect. And purchase one from there. Thank you, Barbara, for being with us. I'd love to ask 3 questions to my guests before they go. So if you're ready, I'm ready. I'm ready to ask you these questions because it helps me to just find out a little bit more about you. And you can go anywhere and share your story, or you can just, make it as simple as possible. So what's one bold promise that you can share with the audience today?
First of all, I have to say I love these questions. They really just got me thinking in lots of directions. My bold promise, and this is really to myself, is to keep writing. And the reason I say that is because, like I mentioned earlier, during COVID and just everything that was going on in our world at the time, I shut down because I thought, who needs my book? The world is on fire. And that's not the way to think. I really do believe that any creative endeavor is an act of courage. And I feel like we need lots of courage right now. And I'm just going to keep writing no matter what.
Oh, yes. We need lots of courage right now in many ways. Thank you for adding that.
We do.
Ooh. What's one bold statement that you can share with the audience that will cause a paradigm shift?
This is not original to me. Stephen Pressfield is a writer, and he wrote a book called The War of Art. I recommend it to any artist who's facing resistance, and we all
my
face
goodness.
resistance. It's so good. I go back to this book again and again, and he said, and I wrote it, I want to make sure I get it. The pain of not doing is worse than the pain of doing. And it's so true for me. I will not write. I have the cleanest house when I should be writing, and the pain of not writing is worse. Or even, in life in general, I won't exercise. I won't eat healthy foods. The pain of not doing the right thing is worse than doing it. So just do what you need to do. I have that on my mirror in my bathroom. I see it every day.
Yes, the War of Art is a great recommendation. So
I
if you
love
are
it.
facing resistance, that is one book that will help you just put things into perspective and look at yourself in a different lens. Thank you for adding that. But we want you to get our book, okay? So please, Rain Breaks No Bones. That's the book I want you to get. Yes. One more question. What's a bold move that you'd like to make in the future? We talked about this a little bit, but give us some more.
I've been thinking about this, and honestly, this is more just in general, again, giving the climate, the hard times we're facing. And I have committed to practicing defiant joy. I know things are hard. I know people are suffering, and I'm going to do everything I can to try to help. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but it's something I've been thinking about. But I also want to find the joy. I think that adds to everybody's experience. I want to find the joy. I want to be the joy. I just want to look for it. I think if we look for it, we'll find it. And I do think that's an act of defiance right now, because everyone wants us to be afraid.
Yes.
And they're trying to motivate us to act out of fear. And I want to act out of joy.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, because fear will only, we're not going to go there, but thank you for bringing that up, because pressuring us and pushing us to act out of fear, that is not going to bring us joy. That is going to give us anxiety. And we don't want our future. We don't want to live in anxiety. So we need to embrace whatever it is that's coming our way and see how we can make this work.
Exactly. That's and that's not being a Pollyanna, I don't think, because I know there are tough times and I know there's work to be done, but we can still find joy in that work. And so that's what I'm trying to focus on, so that I'm not a bundle of nerves right now.
Exactly.
So
But how
that's my
can
goal.
we work towards, because you're not going to get your way all the time. And, for example, with this election, a lot of us feel like, oh my God, I can't believe this is what we've come to. But this is what we've come to. This is what we are. This is what we're doing. This is our, the majority of people chose this president. So let's see, how can we make this work? What can we do to embrace? I'm not saying we're Pollyanna, or everything. If we just wish it perfect, it will be perfect. But there are a lot of things that we can do collectively to work together to ensure that the things that we want, the things that are important to us, really are the things that are put forward for our future, for our children's future. There are a lot of things that we can do. Despite the things that we can't, there are much more things, because things are that. This is one rule that I want you to remember. As much good as there are in something, there's the same amount of bad in something. So if we're looking at something and saying, oh my God, this is so bad, trust me, there is as much good in that same situation.
I love that. I love that.
Thank you. I preached again.
No, we need that. We need that. So thank you. We all need a little lift right now.
Yes. And thank you for being a part of this podcast, and for sharing, and for giving us the insight that you brought. And for those of you who would like to follow, where can they follow you? You said your website earlier, but is there any place else that you're on? Are you on Facebook? Are you on Instagram? Are you on LinkedIn?
You're so good. I'm on all of those. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Threads. And I'm thinking about Blue Sky. I'm terrible at social media, but I'm figuring out how to navigate it. So I'm there. If you go to my webpage, you'll see the links for all of my social media, and you can
All
click
right.
right on. It's easy.
Thank you very much. And for those of you who are thinking about writing a book and you just don't know where to start, send me an email to authordnicholson@gmail.com. We'll talk about it. And thank you for listening. We appreciate you, and we are growing, and thank you for being a part of that growth. So until next time, see you again next week.
Thank you for joining us for the Bold Book of the Day with Dr. Denise Nicholson, a central hub and a safe space for authors to share their stories. Follow Dr. Denise on Facebook and Instagram at Denise Nicholson, or go to denisenicholson.com. Remember, no one can share your story better than you.